महाराष्ट्र गांधी स्मारक निधीतर्फे दरवर्षीप्रमाणे यावर्षी आपण राष्ट्रपिता महात्मा गांधी सप्ताह साजरा करतोय. 6वं वर्ष आहे. मागच्या 5 वर्षामध्ये आपण अनेक सांस्कृतिक आणि वैचारिक कार्यक्रम चांगल्या पद्धतीचे घेतलेले आहेत. या वर्षीच्या सप्ताहामध्ये जे अनेक महत्त्वाचे कार्यक्रम, त्याच्यातलं अतिशय महत्त्वाचं जे व्याख्यान आहे ते आज आपल्यासमोर आपण आयोजित केलेलं आहे. राजूरकर सर हे हैदराबादवरून आलेले आहेत आणि आज ते नेहरूंचं जे काही भारतीय राजकारणामध्ये त्यांची भूमिका आहे स्वातंत्र्यपूर्व काळामध्ये आणि स्वातंत्र्यानंतरच्या काळामध्ये, त्याविषयी ते बोलणार आहेत. ते इंग्रजीमध्ये बोलणार आहेत. राजूरकर सर हे पुण्यामध्ये अनेकांना परिचित आहे. सत्याग्रहीमध्ये मागच्या वर्षी आपण जो दिवाळी अंक काढला होता, त्या दिवाळी अंकामध्ये जवाहरलाल नेहरूविषयी अनेक लेख घेतले होते. त्याच्यामध्ये अतिशय महत्त्वाचा लेख राजूरकर सरांचा होता. त्यांचं एक फार मोठं या सगळ्या इतिहासाच्या क्षेत्रामध्ये, राजकीय इतिहास लिहिण्याच्या क्षेत्रामध्ये फार मोठं योगदान आहे. ते स्वतः या अनेक घटनांचे साक्षीदार आहेत. उस्मानिया विद्यापीठामध्ये राज्यशास्त्राचे ते प्रमुख म्हणून त्यांनी काम केलेलं आहे. जवाहरलाल नेहरू हा त्यांचा संशोधनाचा विषय होता, डॉक्टरेटचा विषय होता आणि त्याविषयी त्यांनी PhD केलेली आहे. भाषेच्या संदर्भामध्ये उर्दू भाषेवरती त्यांचं प्रभुत्व आहे. हैदराबाद हे निजामांच्या अखत्यारीत होतं आणि त्या काळामध्ये शाळेमध्ये उर्दू शिकणं हे होतंच, एक विषय म्हणून पण होता आणि त्याप्रमाणे ते उर्दू आणि पर्शियन या दोन्ही भाषासहित मराठी आणि इंग्रजी भाषा पण त्यांना अवगत आहेत. त्यांनी वेगवेगळ्या याच्यावरती विशेषतः नेहरूंच्या भूमिकेवरती जे संशोधन केलेलं आहे त्याला खूप मोठी मान्यता आहे. आणि स्वातंत्र्य चळवळीच्या संदर्भामध्ये 1991 साली लोकसभेमध्ये त्यांनी पूर्ण ती मांडणी केलेली इतिहास भारतीय स्वातंत्र्य चळवळीच्या संदर्भामध्ये. 98 साली अमेरिकेमध्ये गेले असताना अमेरिकेमध्ये त्यांनी ठिकठिकाणी या विषयावरती व्याख्यानं दिलेली आहेत. त्यांच्या या कार्याची दखल घेऊन 1991 साली आंध्र प्रदेश सरकारने त्यांना एक शिक्षणाच्या क्षेत्रामध्ये जे महत्त्वाचे कार्य केलेले त्याच्याबद्दल त्यांना पुरस्कार दिलेला आहे. महाराष्ट्र सरकारने त्यांना विठ्ठलरामजी शिंदेच्या नावाचा पुरस्कार दिलेला आहे. आणि दुसराही एक कुमुदबेन पुरस्कार दिलेला आहे. पतियाळा इथे पंजाबमध्ये पंजाबी विद्यापीठ आहे, तिथे त्यांना डिलीट ही मानद पदवी दिलेली आहे. असे राजूरकर त्यांनी एक या विषयावरती स्वतःला एक कमिटमेंटच्या दृष्टिकोनातून हे सगळी मांडणी ते करतायत, आग्रहाने करतायत. आणि त्यांचा हा दीर्घ अनुभव, हे संशोधन करताना जवाहरलाल नेहरूंना प्रत्यक्ष भेटण्याचं, त्यांच्याशी बोलण्याची त्यांना संधी मिळालेली, दीर्घ मुलाखत त्यांनी घेतलेली, या सगळ्या अनुभवाचा फायदा आपल्यापर्यंत पोचवणं आणि विशेषतः आजच्या परिस्थितीमध्ये की जिथे महात्मा गांधी आणि जवाहरलाल नेहरू यांचं विकृत चित्र उभं करण्याचा प्रयत्न काही शक्ती जाणीवपूर्वक करतायत. ज्यांना इथल्या सेक्युलरिझम संपवायचा आहे, ज्यांना इथलं सांप्रदायिक सद्भावना संपवायची आहे, ज्यांना देशाच्या एकतेपेक्षा बाकीच्या गोष्टीमध्ये जास्त इंटरेस्ट आहे, अशा शक्ती फार कार्यरत झालेल्या आहे. केरळमधल्या तर एका विद्वानाने असं उद्गार काढले होते की नथुरामने गांधींचं खून केलं, त्याच्यापेक्षा जवाहरलाल नेहरूंचं खून करायला पाहिजे होतं. तर अशा ज्या विकृत विचार ज्यावेळी आपल्या समोर येत आहेत त्यावेळी पुन्हा पुन्हा आपल्या स्वातंत्र्य चळवळीचा इतिहास, त्या चळवळीतली मूल्य हे आपल्यासमोर येणं महत्त्वाचं आहे. आणि जे साक्षीदार आहेत, ज्यांनी या विषयावरती अधिकृत म्हणजे त्यांचं एक जागतिक पातळीवरती एक त्यांची ऑथॉरिटी मान्य केली जाते, असे राजूरकर सर आपल्या इथे आलेले आहेत. मला आशा आहे की त्यांच्या अनुभवाचा आपल्याला खूप उपयोग होईल. आमचा असाही प्रयत्न आहे की हे व्याख्यान तर आज होईल, आज काही व्याख्यान झाल्यानंतर अध्यक्षीय समारोप डॉक्टर करतील, पण 1 किंवा 2 दिवसांनी काही निवडक लोकांच्याबरोबर, जे तरुण ज्यांना जास्त याच्यामध्ये इंटरेस्ट आहे, त्यांच्याबरोबर त्यांची एक इन्फॉर्मल चर्चा, प्रश्नोत्तरं असाही आपण एक कार्यक्रम करण्याचा आपला प्रयत्न आहे. आपल्या सगळ्यांच्या वतीने मी त्यांचं स्वागत करतो. आमचे अध्यक्ष डॉक्टर कुमार सप्तर्शी, त्यांना मी विनंती करतो की त्यांना आपण स्मृतिचिन्ह, पुष्पगुच्छ आणि शाल देऊन त्यांचा सत्कार करावा. सरांनी मराठीमध्ये प्रतिबिंब नावाचं पुस्तक लिहिलं आहे. त्या पुस्तकाला देखील महाराष्ट्र शासनाचा पुरस्कार मिळालेला आहे. एक संदीप, एक 2 फूल दीदींच्या हस्ते सौ राजूरकर खाली बसलेले आहेत, त्यांनाही द्याव्यात अशी मी त्यांना विनंती करतो. हां, ते आपली वेळ ठरलेली 7 तारखेला 11 वाजता. राजूरकर सरांनी अनौपचारिक चर्चा किंवा ज्याला आपण प्रश्नोत्तर म्हणू यासाठी 7 तारखेला सकाळी 11 ते 12:30 ही वेळ आपल्याला दिलेली आहे. या वेळेमध्ये ज्यांना खरोखर इंटरेस्ट आहे या विषयावरती त्यांनी त्याच्यामध्ये उपस्थित राहावं अशी मी विनंती करतो. आणि आपल्या सगळ्यांच्या वतीने ही जी अनौपचारिक चर्चा आहे ती मराठी आणि इंग्रजी या दोन्ही भाषेमध्ये होऊ शकेल. आजचं मात्र जे व्याख्यान आहे ते मात्र इंग्रजीमध्ये होणार आहे. मी आपल्या सगळ्यांच्या वतीने आणि महाराष्ट्र गांधी स्मारक निधीच्या वतीने राजूरकर सरांना विनंती करतो की त्यांनी आपलं व्याख्यान करावं.
आजच्या समारंभाचे अध्यक्ष डॉक्टर कुमार सप्तर्षी, श्री अनवर, बंधू भगिनींनो, सुरुवातीला काही शब्द मी मराठीतून बोलणार आहे. आणि त्याचं कारण हे की महाराष्ट्रीय समाजासमोर एका महाराष्ट्रीय माणसानं इंग्रजीतून बोलणं फारसं श्रेयस्कर वाटत नाही. त्याची स्वतः मला जाणीव आहे. आणि म्हणून इंग्रजीत भाषण सुरू करण्यापूर्वी मी इथल्या श्रोत्यांची क्षमा मागू इच्छितो. कॉलेजमध्ये 30-35 वर्ष जे अध्यापन मी केलं ते इंग्रजीतून. देशी परदेशी जी भाषणं माझी होतात ती इंग्रजीतून. नुकताच मी अमेरिकेतून परत आलो, तिथेही वारंवार मला इंग्रजीतून बोलावं लागलं. या सगळ्या गोष्टी लक्षात घेऊन विचार मांडणं मला इंग्रजीतून सोपं जाईल असं वाटलं. आणि डॉक्टर कुमार सप्तर्षी यांनी मोठ्या मनाने मी इंग्रजीत बोलल्यास चालेल असं सांगितलं. पण मला असं वाटलं की आपलीसुद्धा मी क्षमा मागितली पाहिजे. माझी वृत्ती अशी आहे की जेव्हा मी मराठीतून बोलतो तेव्हा इंग्रजीचा एकही शब्द येऊ नये याबद्दल माझा कटाक्ष असतो. पण जेव्हा एका राजकीय विषयावर बोलायचं असतं तर कित्येक तांत्रिक असे शब्द येतात आणि मग ते अर्ध मराठी आणि अर्ध इंग्रजी बनतं, जे माझ्या स्वभावाला मानवत नाही. आणि म्हणून अध्यक्षांची परवानगी घेऊन मी इंग्रजीतून बोलायचं ठरवलं आणि त्याची आता मी सुरुवात करतो आहे. चेअरमन ऑफ टुडेज मीटिंग डॉक्टर कुमार सप्तर्षी, श्री अनवर, ladies and gentlemen, I belong to a generation which was very profoundly influenced by the personality, books, and quality of leadership that was provided by Jawaharlal Nehru. People of my generation had a bond with Nehru not only on the intellectual level but also on the emotional level. We were greatly influenced by his charismatic personality. His books influenced us. His approach to problems influenced us. His speeches influenced us. So we are, in a way, products of the ideas of Jawaharlal Nehru, the other person being Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. These two were the great influences on the life of my generation, and I am sure the President today, in a way, also belongs to that generation, a generation which was influenced by these two very extraordinary persons. We were influenced or impressed by Jawaharlal Nehru's moral and physical courage. He recklessly rushed into the crowds at Connaught Circus in Delhi in order to snatch away daggers from the hands of mad rioters. How many prime ministers would do that? He had, in spite of the fact that Gandhiji had called him his political successor, he had the moral courage to criticize some of Gandhiji's ideas. His capacity to project his mind into the future and sense the requirements of today and tomorrow was prodigious. A man of extraordinary sensitivity. When he was in the Dehradun jail, he used to get up several times in the night just to feed an alien dog. The dog was not keeping well, and Nehru couldn't sleep during the night. And in 1936, when the Spanish Civil War was going on, and Nehru's sympathies were with the Democrats and not with General Franco, Nehru couldn't sleep for days together. And when somebody told him, he actually rang up Khaja Ahmad Abbas of Bombay Chronicle around 3 o'clock in the morning on a certain day and said, Abbas, what is the news from the Spanish front? Abbas said, Panditji, the Democrats are winning. Nehru said, thank God, I can sleep now. And when ultimately, as ill luck would have it, the Spanish Democrats were crushed by General Franco's army, Nehru wrote in his autobiography that the Spanish tragedy came to me as a personal sorrow. This sort of a sensitivity to happenings in other countries also, the only person that I can think of, apart from Gandhiji, was Raja Ram Mohan Roy, who was very, very sensitive to happenings in other countries. Whenever I think of Nehru's sensitivity to international problems, a humanist in the true sense of the word, I am reminded of a couplet by the poet Amir. He says, खंजर चले किसी पे तो तड़पते हैं हम अमीर, खंजर चले किसी पे तो तड़पते हैं हम अमीर, सारे जहां का दर्द हमारे जिगर में है. So that was Nehru, and inevitably we were influenced by what he was. As ill luck would have it, Mr. Chairman, things have changed now. I have been speaking on Jawaharlal Nehru almost for the last 5 decades. And I have sensed a change in the reaction of the audience roughly from 1970. Before that, it was like swimming with the tide. Whenever I talked about Nehru, I almost felt that 100 images of Jawaharlal Nehru came before the minds of my audience, and I could make out from their expressions that they were saying in silent words, yes, what you are saying is true, Nehru was great. We too had experience of that sort. But after that, things have become different. It is like swimming against the tide. I no longer consider that as a matter of great privilege to speak on Nehru, because I know the antagonism against him. If I speak on Nehru these days, it is because of a commitment. Commitment to a cause. Commitment to a person whose image has been deliberately distorted day after day. After all, Jawaharlal Nehru died 50 years back. Why should people make an effort to destroy his image, to distort his image, and to spread things against him day in and day out? The answer to this question is, even today, they feel threatened by what Nehru stood for. The answer is, even today, they know that there are people who stand by what Jawaharlal Nehru did for the country and those who believe in his ideology. So all those who want to destroy Jawaharlal Nehru's ideology go on criticizing him, distorting his image, and therefore, Mr. Chairman, it has become my moral duty, as it is the moral duty of people like me, to place the right perspective, in right perspective, all that Jawaharlal Nehru stood for. To begin with, I shall talk about Jawaharlal Nehru and Gandhiji relationship. For two reasons. Reason number one, repeatedly Gandhiji said that not Rajendra Prasad, not Rajaji, but Jawaharlal is my political successor. And for Jawaharlal Nehru, the greatest political influence in his life was that of Gandhiji. There is another reason as to why I feel that I should talk in some details about Mahatma Gandhi. The reason is that we are celebrating Gandhiji Saptah, and it would be very appropriate on my part to say something about Gandhiji too. Mr. Chairman, there were only two occasions in my life so far when there was mourning in the country in the very, very real sense of the word. Almost as if people had lost somebody belonging to their own family. The first one was when Mahatma Gandhi was assassinated. And the second, when Jawaharlal Nehru passed away. So, emotionally also, I feel extremely pained, extremely unhappy when younger people have a different idea about Jawaharlal Nehru altogether. Dr. Goebbels, the propaganda minister of Hitler, used to say that if we utter a falsehood 100 times, it becomes a truth. People take it as a truth. And that is what is happening in regard to Gandhiji and in regard to Jawaharlal Nehru. The younger people, all that they think is, all that Nehru left to the country was a legacy of unsolved problems. He is held responsible for everything under the sky, responsible for the partition of the country, responsible for the Kashmir problem, responsible for the Chinese problem. What is not remembered, for one thing, people do not know the facts. And it is my duty to place the facts before them. And secondly, these distortions are a result of a deliberate effort. It's not as if they do not know the truth, but they want to destroy all that Jawaharlal Nehru stood for. Now, coming to the relationship about Gandhi and Nehru, the first thing that I would like to say is, it was in January 1915 that Gandhiji arrived in India. The first thing that he did was, he went to Pune, he came to this city in order to meet his political mentor, Gopal Krishna Gokhale. And Gokhale advised Gandhi not to take any decision. Mr. Gandhi, don't think of joining the Servants of India Society. Don't try to think in terms of jumping into politics. Take a round around India. Find out what the problems of the Indian people are. try to understand the psyche of the Indian people and then decide as to what you should do. And Gandhi did that. Surprisingly enough, Nehru says in his autobiography that he met Gandhi 2 years roughly after Gandhi stepped on the Indian soil. Nehru says in his autobiography, it was around the Lucknow session of the Congress, 1916, that I met Gandhi for the first time. And Nehru's words in his autobiography are, we admired him greatly for all that he had done in South Africa, but for us, for me and the other young people, Jawaharlal Nehru was about 26 years old then, Gandhi appeared different, distant, and unpolitical. These are the three words that he uses. Gandhi appeared to us different, distant, and unpolitical. Perhaps the most important word is unpolitical. The feeling amongst people in India was, maybe Gandhi is a great man, maybe he did something remarkable in South Africa, but this sadhu, this is the word which one of the great leaders used about Gandhiji, will not succeed in India. And this frail man, who was not a great orator, he used to talk with a lisp. Personality-wise, there was nothing too remarkable about him. And this man, within 5 years, became the greatest leader of India. How are we to account for that? Nehru provides the answer in his autobiography. Now, these facts are relevant in order to understand why Nehru became a disciple of Gandhi and why many other leaders followed Gandhi. This is something which is not too well known, that Gandhi won over the leaders of India before he won over the masses. One after the other, the stalwarts fell for Gandhi. So what was so remarkable about him? Nehru offers explanations. The first explanation is, he made the Congress, and whenever I use the word Congress, please remember that it was another name of India's movement for freedom. So don't mix up the Congress of today with all that happened in the pre-independence period. The Congress organization was an umbrella organization. All those who believed in making India free came under that huge umbrella. Bal Gangadhar Tilak, Gopal Krishna Gokhale, Dadabhai Nauroji, Feroz Shah Mehta, till the subsequent leaders. They all, and the people with different shades of opinion, the socialists, the communists, all of them, insofar as the broad objective was concerned, they said, well, let us become a part of the Congress, because the Congress party stands for the independence of the country. So Gandhi made Congress a dynamic organization. He changed the constitution of the country, constitution of the party. The peasants rolled in, the industrial workers rolled in. It became a very broad-based organization. Earlier, it was restricted only to the educated middle class. And then he made it a dynamic organization. In Nehru's words, before Gandhi came on the political scene, the leaders excelled in platform speeches and passing resolutions which nobody took very seriously. But Gandhi was essentially a man of action, and he placed before the country a program. When the Rowlatt bills were about to be passed, Gandhiji requested the Viceroy not to give his consent to the Rowlatt bills. the Viceroy went ahead with passing the bills, and then Gandhiji placed a program before the people. He said, let us defy the Rowlatt Act and let us defy every other law which according to us is not a proper one. So Nehru was thrilled. He said, after all, somebody is placing an action program before us. And Gandhi used to say, there's only one thing to fear, and that is fear itself. Why are you afraid? And according to Nehru, the predominant impulse under the British was fear. Fear of the government, fear of the officials, fear of the police authority. And then this quiet man said, why are you afraid? Come with me, let us do the right thing. Nehru was greatly fascinated by all these things. The second thing which drew Nehru to Gandhi was his sense of judgment. Nehru says that when the Jallianwala Bagh tragedy took place, I went to Punjab along with Gandhiji as a private secretary. And whenever Gandhi used to react to something, we always thought that this is a very unrealistic approach to the problem. And then when we gave thought to it, we realized that this was the right approach. And my faith in his judgment grew. Not only Jawaharlal Nehru's faith, but in the faith of others also. I shall just give one or two anecdotes because that makes things simpler and possibly more interesting. Some people here must have heard about the great poet Josh Malihabadi, probably one of the greatest Urdu poets after Ghalib and Iqbal. Josh Malihabadi has written a very extremely interesting autobiography in Urdu, Yaadon Ki Barat. In this autobiography, he makes a mention of this anecdote. He says that in 1918, I attended the Congress session and I saw Gandhi for the first time. And Josh says, I was terribly disappointed. मेरा दिल बैठ गया. ऐसा आदमी और हिंदुस्तान की क़ियादत करे. A man with such an ordinary personality. And he is going to lead the country. He was, of course, a great friend of Jawaharlal Nehru. And Jawaharlal Nehru was incredibly handsome. And Gandhi, his nearest friends wouldn't have called him a very attractive person. So that was Josh Malihabadi's first reaction. And then Josh says, after some time, I got into Gandhi's tent along with Maulana Abul Kalam Azad. And I came out of the tent after a half hour with a feeling that India just cannot have a better leader. Now, look at this. Gandhi's capacity to win over people, his capacity to persuade people to see facts as they are. It's not an easy thing. Yet another anecdote, and that is about the great C.R. Das, Chittaranjan Das, the guru of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, a first-rate lawyer, a man with a razor-sharp intellect, very, very confident of himself. He attended the Nagpur session of the Congress in 1920. He attended it with the avowed intention of defeating Gandhi. Gandhiji was about to start the non-cooperation movement, and he brought with him a large number of young Bengali delegates full of revolutionary ideas. They told C.R. Das told them, look here, we are going to Nagpur and we have to defeat Gandhi's resolution. They said, "Sir, where is the question of supporting that Gandhi? We are all with you, and we shall oppose Gandhi's resolution on non-cooperation." The resolution was to be moved the next day. Around 10 o'clock on the previous day, Gandhi sent a note to C.R. Das. He said, "C.R. Das ji, you can oppose my resolution tomorrow, but would you please make it convenient for you to see me for about 10 minutes? C.R. Das, so confident of himself, a man of real razor-sharp intellect, who had won many legal cases, he strode into Gandhi's tent like a tiger. After all, I have to crush this small man. They had a quiet talk for about 10 to 15 minutes. At the end of that talk, C.R. Das thumbed the table in front of him and said, "Damn it, Gandhi, you are always right, we are always wrong." And he came out of Gandhi's tent no longer like a lion or a tiger, but as a lamb. And he went to the delegates' camp and said, "I am not going to move any resolution tomorrow, support Gandhi's resolution." This was how he won over the people. People supported him because gradually they developed faith in his judgment, in the quality of leadership, and that he meant what was really good for the entire country. I will just mention one small anecdote before I switch over to other things. In 1932, Gandhiji attended the Round Table Conference as the sole representative of Indian National Congress. The king decided to invite all the leaders who had come from India at Buckingham Palace, a dinner at Buckingham Palace. And the only person who was not invited was Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. Gandhi with a loincloth. Gandhi, who was referred to later on by Winston Churchill as that half-naked fakir. He was not invited. And when the Viceroy came to know about it, the Viceroy sent a cable to the Prime Minister and to the King, and in it he stated, "The old man is the biggest thing in India, and an insult to that man is an insult to the entire country." And then, of course, Gandhiji was invited to the dinner at Buckingham Palace. Now, Nehru comes nearer to Gandhiji. Nehru likes Gandhiji's program of rural uplift. Nehru was in support of Gandhiji's program in regard to the elimination of all that stood for between one caste and the other. And Nehru also thought that here was a man who could lead India and no one else. One remarkable thing that I would like to state here is Nehru did two remarkable things in the beginning. Number one, he realized the inevitability of Gandhiji's leadership. And he knew that if we ignore Gandhi for smaller things, I will not call them smaller, matters of secondary importance at that time, whether it was socialism or something else. The primary objective before the country was independence of the country, and Nehru knew that without Gandhi, the movement cannot prosper. So he did not leave Gandhiji. It was not because Gandhiji called him the political successor. He had the moral strength and courage to criticize Gandhiji, but he realized instinctively that Gandhiji's leadership was a must for the Congress, and therefore he saw to it that there was no crisis in the Congress vis-à-vis Gandhiji's leadership. whether it was at the time of the Subhash Chandra Bose episode of 1929 or earlier still, Nehru sometimes was disappointed, but he felt that there was no alternative to Gandhiji's leadership. The second thing that I would like to stress is, in spite of his radical views about democratic socialism, he was a man in a hurry. In spite of all that, he realized that there should not be any rift in the Congress party because these are matters of secondary importance. I should be patient. And therefore he did not join the Congress Socialist Party. The Congress Socialist Party had great men in that party: Jai Prakash ji, Ram Manohar Lohia, Achyut Patwardhan, Aruna Asaf Ali, S.M. Joshi, several outstanding people, men of integrity, people who had a clear-cut idea in regard to what should be done. But Nehru realized that he shouldn't become a part of a smaller group in the interests of India's cause of freedom. The second thing that I would like to say is that I don't know how to say this. I will say that Nehru accepted Gandhiji's ideas in the framework of modernity. This is how I will put it. Nehru had a fairly clear idea in regard to the road map, in regard to the road that India has to follow. He also took into account the international situation. Here I may strike a personal note. As Mr. Anwar pointed out, I had the privilege of meeting Jawaharlal Nehru, and because of his greatness, he gave me a lengthy time. He was a world figure at that time. I was on the threshold of 30, but he realized the importance of research work, and he thought that a research scholar is meeting me and I should give him sufficient time. May I in this connection say something else of the personal nature? When I got into his room, he always used to stand up before the other person got into the room. When the interview was over, he came up to the door, opened the door himself so that I may leave the chamber. How many people would do that? So much of concern for the other person, and he answered every question very, very quietly, very, very patiently, though he was not known for his patience, but he knew that here was a young man who was doing research. And whenever he was answering any question, something else struck me, and that was his approach was three-dimensional. Whenever a problem confronted him, he took into consideration India's past, the present-day India, and the international conditions. He used to say that ours is not an island. We are a part of the bigger whole, and whatever happens in other countries, whatever happens on the international level, will have its effect on India and India's future and India's politics. Years later, when Jawaharlal Nehru passed away, many tributes were paid to him by great people all over the world. But the tribute which struck me most and impressed me most was the one by C. Rajagopalachari of Madras. One of the wisest people that we had, N.V. Gadgil, in his Marathi autobiography, compares him with Adya Shankaracharya insofar as intellectual caliber was concerned. Adya Shankaracharyaची बुद्धी असलेला माणूस. C. Rajagopalachari in his long tribute said something. The last part struck me greatly. He said he was the most civilized among us all. He was the most civilized among us all when many of us are not even civilized. And I had that experience. A man of world repute showing so much of concern to somebody who was on the threshold of his life. So this was the personal side of Jawaharlal Nehru. I will come to the second aspect of Nehru's contribution, and that is, if you study the resolutions of the Indian National Congress, it's a fashion to run down Nehru at every stage, but people should take the trouble of going through all this and they will realize Nehru's greatness. If you study those resolutions, you will find firstly that almost all the important resolutions were moved by Jawaharlal Nehru or were drafted by Jawaharlal Nehru. I will give the example of only 3 or 4 resolutions. There were so many. The first one, the resolution passed at the Madras session of the Indian National Congress in 1927. The resolution was entitled Resolution on Independent India's Foreign Policy. India was far away from independence. As late as 1940, when Winston Churchill was the Prime Minister of England, a member of the Labour Party, and the Labourites were sympathetic to the cause of India's freedom, he said, "Mr. Prime Minister, what about India's independence?" And Churchill's reply was, "I have not become the first minister. First minister is the Prime Minister. I have not become the first minister of His Majesty's government in order to preside over the liquidation of the British Empire. God willing, the sun will never set on the British Empire." Fortunately for India, and unfortunately for Mr. Winston S. Churchill, the sun did go down on the British Empire 7 years later. But that's another part of the story. The point that I was trying to make was Nehru's vision when he thought in terms of what India would do after India becomes free. For most others, the immediate goal was India's independence. And many senior leaders of the Congress thought that keeping quiet about what we would do is very advisable. All that we should say is, all the evils are due to the British in India. If the son has a stomachache, so long as the British are here, you will suffer like that. That attitude, building up discontent against the British, and saying that, well, we shall cross the bridge when we come to it. In a way, wise policy, because otherwise people get divided on smaller issues. But Nehru thought that this was wrong. People should be made ready for the acceptance of new ideas. People don't accept new ideas quickly. Let me gradually prepare them for those ideas. But before that, coming to India's foreign policy resolution, if you study that resolution, you will realize that all the basic principles of India's foreign policy were laid down in that resolution in 1927, 20 years before India became free. And nobody knew when India would become free. Possibly it would have taken 2 decades or 3 decades more. So that was the vision of that man. And then preparing the people for independent India's problems. I will say that he prepared a road map of India's future. What is it that we have to do? What is it that we have to avoid? And when Nehru used to move resolutions on socialism, the other great leaders used to accept those resolutions, saying privately, these are the fads of this young man Jawaharlal Nehru. Let us pass them. What does it matter? But when the resolutions were passed, the country was taking these resolutions seriously. They did not know what the leader said privately, and they gradually got prepared for democratic socialism. Through his writings, through his speeches, through his resolutions, Jawaharlal Nehru prepared the minds of the people for the acceptance of democratic socialism. What was this democratic socialism? I'm not going to details. I'm very, very conscious of the fact that there is always a time limit to such lectures and that one should stop before the saturation point is reached. But in a nutshell, this is what Nehru had in his mind. Number one, abolition of the princely states. 1/3 of India was covered by the Indian princes. There were as many as 600 princely states, and they were totally autocratic. There was feudalism there. The people suffered greatly economically, barring the people at the top, maybe the Nawabs, the Maharajas, the Jagirdars, the Mansabdars, and all that. Others suffered greatly, irrespective of the fact as to whether they were the members of the Hindu community or Muslim community or any other community. So Nehru thought that socialism for India implied the abolition of the princely states. Surprisingly enough, even Mahatma Gandhi was not in favor of the Congress establishing contacts with the princely states. Gandhiji took the view up to 1938 that let me try to win over the princes. But Nehru thought that this may not work because the princes were supported by the British. The British always played the policy of divide and rule. There was the Chamber of Princes, and the princes were not too interested in India's movement for freedom, barring a few enlightened princes. So Nehru became a supporter of what was known as All India States People's Conference. States here, the native states, the princely states, and he was the guiding spirit behind All India People's States Conference, and he saw to it that awakening was created in the masses of these princely states so that when a time comes, the masses will support India's movement for freedom, the Congress party, and not their respective kings. So that was a great thing. Here may I mention something else. Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel was a great administrator, and he is very rightly given the credit for bringing all these princely states in the fold of the Indian Union. But may I point out, with all respect for him, that but for the spade work which Nehru had done before independence, Patel wouldn't have found the work too easy after independence. Now then comes yet one or two important resolutions. The resolution to which I am going to make a mention now is a resolution which was drafted by Nehru and was moved by Gandhiji. The resolution is known as Resolution on Fundamental Rights and Economic Program. The year 1931, the session took place at Karachi. The president for the year was Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel. This is a very, very important resolution which became the basis of India's fundamental rights when those fundamental rights were incorporated in the Constitution of India. And if you study this resolution very carefully, it becomes very, very clear that the picture that Nehru had before his mind's eye of India was a democratic, secular India where everybody will have his rights and everybody will be able to live a peaceful life. Nehru was a great secularist. D.F. Karaka, he wrote quite a few books in English, some of them very critical of Jawaharlal Nehru. One such book is Nehru, the Lotus Eater from Kashmir. Very critical of Nehru, but even D.F. Karaka concedes that secularism was almost an instinct with Nehru. Somehow we get the feeling that we have become secular in order to please this group or that group. You cannot have democracy in India without India becoming a secular state. For India, secularism is a logical corollary of democracy. Just put aside secularism and then democracy loses all its meaning. So here was a person who stood like a rock when it came to basic things. I will say something which perhaps interests you. C.D. Deshmukh spent the last 15 or 20 years of his life in the city of Hyderabad. And we had the opportunity of meeting him on several occasions. C.D. Deshmukh had his differences with Gandhi, with Nehru on certain matters. He had come to the college where I was teaching. And our principal introduced me to C.D. Deshmukh, saying that he's an authority on Jawaharlal Nehru. And do you know what C.D. Deshmukh said? In spite of his differences with Nehru, he said, the days of Mount Everest are over. All that we have is, and he named hillocks in and around Hyderabad. He said, now what we have now is a Naubat Pahad here, a Maula Ali there, a Malkarjgiri there, but no one who can be called a Mount Everest. So all the critics of Nehru should bear in mind that a man of C.D. Deshmukh's caliber referred to Nehru as a Mount Everest. And then he said something else. He said, when it comes to basic things, Nehru is like an iron hand with a velvet glove. He doesn't budge an inch from those things. He will lay down his life for those basic convictions. Maybe on secondary matters, he was Hamlet-like, but not when it came to certain basic issues in which he had complete faith. Can you imagine what conditions were when India became free? When the partition of India took place, people were mad with frenzy. People started talking in terms of a Hindu Rashtra. Now what is it that we owe to the Muslims? They have their state, let us have our state. Delhi was in the grip of almost a civil war. The police was paralyzed. The police did not know what to do. At that time, the one person who stood like a rock vis-a-vis secularism was Jawaharlal Nehru. It's not an easy thing to do. When people are mad, people are angry, and people want to change things, to stand by your convictions and said that India will remain a secular state and I stand by it is not an ordinary thing. So that was Nehru. These were his resolutions. Now I will come to the third thing. But before I say that, Mr. Chairman, the important thing in life is how many people you can carry with you. Gandhi had the unique capacity of carrying the entire country with him. Women, men, children, the frontier Pathan people. It is said about the Pathans that they love their gun more than their brother. Now these people became non-violent under Gandhi, and there is one worth remembering incident in 1930 when Gandhiji started the civil disobedience movement. The Pathans in Peshawar took out a procession, And these people, aggressive people, were totally non-violent, and the British brigadier was firing at them. When the leader died, somebody else picked up his body. They continued their march towards the government house, and several people were killed by that brigadier. But the march continued, and the march continued in a totally non-violent fashion. Then the brigadier asked the Gadwali troop, the Indian troop, to fire at the Pathans. And do you know what these Pathans, these ordinary people did? Very ordinary people. They put down their rifles on the floor. They said, "Sir, these are our compatriots. We shall not fire on them." These members of the Gadwali troop were sentenced to life imprisonment and were set free only when India became free. Now the point that I am making is, it's not easy to carry people with you. We may talk a great deal about our capacity to do this and do that. Jawaharlal Nehru had that capacity. And he made my generation, the generation of Dr. Kumar Saptarshi, a generation of secular-minded people. It's we who are trying to wage the battle against great odds, and that is not easy. We are fighting, in a way, a losing battle, but that is not going to happen. The point that I am trying to make is, Jawaharlal Nehru made the entire generation a generation of secular-minded people, a generation of faith in democracy, and to inculcate these ideas into the minds of the people is not an easy thing. Then comes the next thing. Nehru gave an international dimension to India's movement for freedom. He used to say that India's movement for freedom is not an isolated phenomenon, it is a part of a wider movement against colonialism and imperialism in which other countries also should be interested. So he built up a group of those who are fighting for their freedom and those who stood for democracy. Can you imagine a freedom fighter? And Nehru was just a freedom fighter at that time. At a time when the British statesmen and the French statesmen considered it an honor to meet Mussolini and Hitler. Nehru refused to meet them even then. In 1936, he refused to meet Mussolini, though Mussolini was very keen that Nehru should meet him. In 1938, Hitler extended an invitation to Nehru. He said, "You can come as the official guest or incognito, nobody will come to know about it." But Nehru turned down that invitation also because he said, "I shall have nothing to do with fascism and Nazism, which are diametrically opposite to the principles of democracy." So the picture that Nehru placed before the world was the picture of a country which was not opportunistic, but which a country which believed in certain principles. In 1945, Roosevelt brought pressure on Winston Churchill. He said, "Why don't you transfer power to Indian hands?" Churchill said, "What is the guarantee that Indian National Congress will stand by the allies?" And Roosevelt said, "The guarantee is Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. He believes in democracy. He has projected him as a Democrat." So Nehru got the support of the Democrats of the world and got the support of the countries that were struggling for independence. And that strengthened the cause of India's independence. Earlier efforts were made. Dadabhai Nauroji made such an effort when he started two societies in London, the London Society and the East India Association, to promote better understanding between British intelligentsia and India, so that these people may know what India stands for. Later on, Bal Gangadhar Tilak did something similar. He put forward the idea that we should support the Labour Party in elections, which stands for India's independence. And the Congress deputed Tilak and two others to attend the World Peace Conference at Versailles after the First World War. Tilak was not allowed to go, but he submitted a memorandum to that great organization, in which Tilak said, India should become free because a free India will support the cause of democracy on the international plane. The point is, there is no point in your saying that we want to become independent. We should tell others that our becoming independent is to your advantage also, to the advantage of the entire international community, and that was what Jawaharlal Nehru did. He gave an international dimension to India's movement for freedom. Now, coming to Nehru's role in the post-independence period, I'm very conscious of the time factor, therefore I have kept the watch here. No. I have kept the watch in front of me. Thank you. When India became free, there was a very revealing cartoon in a weekly that was very popular at that time, Shankar's Weekly. The cartoon was by R.K. Lakshman, and you are all familiar with that name. That cartoon suggested how hard Nehru was working in order to make India a great country. He was holding several portfolios. The cartoon is like this. The heading of the cartoon is, "The show must go on." And Nehru is shown playing different instruments with his right hand, playing different instruments with his left hand, and on each instrument there is the name of a portfolio. Defense portfolio, Jawaharlal Nehru. External affairs portfolio, Jawaharlal Nehru. And then both the hands are engaged, playing different instruments. Then he starts playing instruments with his toes, right toes and left toes, playing about 20 instruments at a time. And then he asks the audience, is there a tabla player in the audience? He gets a reply in the negative, and he starts playing the tabla also. The suggestion is, here was a man who was carrying Herculean burden so that India may go in the right direction. The second thing is, it is easy to say what Nehru did. Nehru had to deal with the problems that were accumulated in 150 years of British misrule. Not one problem, not two problems, hundreds of problems. And what were his advantages? Hardly any. He had to do the pioneering work. Please remember, the Prime Minister of the country, the first Prime Minister, has to do the pioneering work. He has to lay down the traditions. He has to show the right direction. Others merely follow the road, like followers. And at that time, Nehru said two very appropriate things. He said, every age is represented in India, from the cow dung age to the nuclear age. And I have to carry all these people with me. And I have to carry them through the process of democracy. We had not accepted dictatorship. To carry millions people belonging to different religions, belonging to different stages of civilization, and to take them in a certain direction was not easy. The second handicap of Nehru was the Congress party was a heterogeneous organization. All those people had come together because the objective was India's independence. But they pulled in different directions when independence came to the country. Now, to make those people accept your ideology and take them in a certain direction was very, very difficult, and only Jawaharlal Nehru, with his personality, could have done that. It was a very difficult task. And then the process was by no means easy. He had to face all sorts of problems. The country had been partitioned. We had to face all sorts of problems, including the refugee problem. And then the fanatics had raised their hands and raised their heads. And to deal with all these things was a Herculean task. The first thing that he did was he formed a government in which about half the people were non-Congress people. Now try to understand this. You are displeasing the people of your own party. You are not choosing them. Instead, you are choosing C.D. Deshmukh, John Mathai, T.T. Krishnamachari, B.R. Ambedkar, and many other people very eminent in their respective fields. So C.D. Deshmukh himself said that what Nehru did was he formed a national government at the center at the risk of getting displeased by the people of his own party. Chagla was not a member of the Congress party, and Nehru included him also. So that was statesman-like action, that including Shyama Prasad Mukherjee, who did not perhaps share all Nehru's ideals, but Nehru felt that he was a very competent man and he should be there. So this was vision. And as Joseph Mazzoni says, where there is no vision, people perish. Nehru had that vision, historical sense, a sense of what should be done in the context of India's past, India's present, and the international situation. Somehow people think that Nehru had no regard for India's past. Please go through Discovery of India. He is full of respect for India's past. He has written about the Vedas. He has written about the Upanishads. He has written about the great legacy that has fallen on us. Once he gave a very beautiful example, which is worth remembering. He said, the past of the country is like the roots of a plant. If you do not nourish them, if you do not give water to them, the plant will die. So what is important is a healthy respect for the past. Don't ignore the past. The present is like the terra firma, what is above the terra firma. The plant requires atmosphere. The plant requires oxygen. The plant requires sunshine, without which the plant will not grow. So what is required is a harmonious combination between the past and the present. But at the same time, he said, everything about the past is not worthwhile, and we must have that sense of discrimination. Once he said, our ancestors played fought their wars with bows and arrows. Should we say that we should use bows and arrows today too, just because they were used during the period of Mahabharata? So the point is a sense of discrimination, accepting what is worthwhile about India's past, and Nehru's faith in the past and respect for the past was as much as that of those people who are criticizing Nehru. The difference is Nehru understood the impulse of India better than those who claim that they understand India's past and they know what our inheritance is. And our inheritance, please, is a result of the efforts of people belonging to all the communities, not a single community. The Muslims contributed a great deal. The Christians did so, even the Parsis. So every section of the society has contributed to the richness of India's culture, and that is the reason as to why we call India's culture a synthesis, a result of whether it is the field of music or the field of dance or the field of architecture, the contribution of every group is very great. So this is what I call understanding the past and proceeding in a particular direction. And for India, secularism is inevitable. It has absolutely no alternative. And please remember, secularism does not interfere with your religion. I can be as much of a Hindu as I want to, though I would live in a secular state. Nobody prevents me from offering puja. Nobody prevents me from going to a temple. So what is the complaint about? And if you start thinking in narrow terms, you are merely weakening the country. The country will become weak, it will lose all its status, and its image also will get distorted. Then Nehru, as a democrat, he nurtured the tender plant of democracy very carefully, in a very delicate fashion. Please go through Nehru's speeches in the parliament. They are dignified speeches, very restrained speeches in spite of his impatience. And whenever the members of the parliament went wrong, did something which was inconsistent with the dignity and decorum of the house, he reprimanded them like a school teacher. It was almost like a school teacher. This is what you should do and this is what you should not do. On a certain occasion, a vote of no confidence was moved against Sri Mavlankar, the first speaker after independence. Nehru got irritated with that vote of no confidence, not because Mavlankar belonged to the Congress party, but because the immaturish way in which the resolution was put forward and the speeches made. He said, this is not what we have to do. We have to lay down the best possible traditions, and on several occasions he used to congratulate the members of the opposition for the good speeches that they delivered. Mr. Vajpayee once said that I criticized the government thoroughly. I did not spare even the Prime Minister. That evening, there was a party at a certain diplomat's embassy, and I was there, and Jawaharlal Nehru was there. I wanted that Jawaharlal Nehru should not notice me because I was so critical of him. So somehow Jawaharlal Nehru tried to find out as to where Vajpayee was. He went to him, he slapped him on his back. हाँ, आज हमको परेशान किया तुमने. Very good. So that is the spirit, appreciating the point of view put forward by other people. Nehru nurtured the plant of democracy in such a way. Please remember, democracy was collapsing like structures made of playing cards in Southeast Asia. The only place where democracy survived and is going to survive is India. When the emergency was declared, a very large number of people, including the friend of right side and the friend on the left side, not rightists and leftists, both of them I suppose are leftists, they went to prison, and then the nation realized that the people in power realized that now onwards people will never accept anything which is a result of the negation of democracy. It has become rooted in the soul of India, and primarily that is due to the 17-year rule of Jawaharlal Nehru. Now people talk about other things. I don't think I have the time to go into all that. Just let me give you one or two examples. We were humbled by China. And then people say, he was such a gullible man, such a naive man. He did not understand the motives of China, went on saying, Hindi, Chini, bhai, bhai, and they stabbed us at our back. Do you know that as early as in 1948, and this event took place in 1962, Nehru wrote a secret letter to the head of the intelligence bureau in which he said, treat China as India's potential enemy number one. Then in 1955, he went to China, and in his public speeches, he talked about something which was, of course, historically true. He said how Fahian came to India, how Huan Sang came to India, and how Buddhism went to China, the old relationship between China and India. That was his refrain in public speeches. A large number of Indian correspondents were accompanying him. Nehru invited him to a tea party in China itself, and he said, the country of which I am most afraid is China. I do not know when this Asian giant will put its feet on our feet, and I want to postpone that eventuality as long as I can. He consulted the Commander-in-Chief of India, General Cariappa, and later on General Thimmaya. He said, are we in a position to fight against China if China attacks us? They said, Mr. Prime Minister, forget it. For about 25 to 30 years more, we will not be able to withstand the Chinese attack. You go on talking in terms of Hindi, Chini, Bhai, Bhai. So that was what he had in his mind. There is documentary proof for that. Similarly about Kashmir. It was a very complicated thing, and I don't want to go into details. Just I would like to mention two things. Offer of a plebiscite was not something new. Vallabhbhai Patel had offered referendum in Hyderabad on the 27th of October 1947. He said, let the people of Hyderabad decide and not the sovereign. Because the principle which Congress followed was, whenever there was a dichotomy, people and the king, we shall go by the verdict of the people. So nothing wrong in saying that we shall hold a plebiscite. And then that plebiscite announcement did not come immediately. A stage came in the war when progress of the Indian army became impossible because of two reasons. One, winter had set in, and two, the Pakistan army was openly supporting the raiders. So it was not possible to move ahead at all. It was at that time Nehru went to the world, because the world would have said, why didn't you come to us when you were in the right? You should have come to us. And anyway, the big powers do dabble in these things, whether you go to the Security Council or not. And history bears testimony to that. So that happened. And then history records, the ambassador of Colombia has gone on record that it was Pakistan which went back on the question of plebiscite. Because Nehru said, we are prepared for a plebiscite. The conditions are these. The Pakistan occupied area should be vacated. The plebiscite should take place under the auspices of the United Nations organization, and a few other conditions. And Pakistan was not ready for that because Sheikh Abdullah's hold was very great. The wounds caused by the raiders were still raw, and Pakistan went on evading a plebiscite at that point of time. So the things are far too complicated, and they are not as simple as they appear to be. I once met a gentleman who went on criticizing Nehru. I said, I don't expect you to know all that I know about Nehru, but let me put 3 questions to you on the basis of common sense. He said, Saab, kya hai wo aapke questions? I said, will you agree that they had at least as much of intelligence, Nehru had at least as much of intelligence as you and I have? Arey nahi saab, aisa kaisa bol sakte? Wo bade aadmi the. I said, question number 2. Do you think that he loved his country, or do you think that he felt that let the country go to dogs? Nahi saab, aisa kaisa bol sakte? उन्होंने इतने sacrifices किए थे. I said, you also probably know that he was in the political field for more than 40 years. Do you think that such a person would be so gullible as to take the other man for his word? These are questions based on common sense, but we are not prepared to accept these things. And now, of course, an era has started when there are great efforts to malign his image. Now, what is it this man did? Very briefly now. He laid down the best possible traditions vis-à-vis parliamentary democracy. He was opposed to India joining Commonwealth in 1930 because at that time the British Commonwealth represented imperialism, colonialism. Now the Commonwealth underwent a complete change, and he thought that it was a good substitute for joining one of the power blocks. Of course, certain things lose some relevance, the relevance of non-alignment, for example. Now there is no Cold War, and there is scope for us to do some open-minded thinking, and Nehru, had he been alive, he too would have done that because he had a flexible mind. Now, one thing which I should have told you earlier, I suppose, and with all respect for Mahatma Gandhi's followers, sometimes I get the feeling they did not understand the Mahatma sufficiently. Karl Marx once said, "Thank God I am not a Marxist." So, sometimes the followers take too rigid a view. Gandhiji believed in non-violence. The right means, the purity of means, and Nehru was greatly influenced by that idea. But Gandhiji had a flexible mind, please remember. And I will narrate an anecdote. In 1960, a debate was going on in Goa, on Goa, in the Lok Sabha. Acharya Kripalani, who was a Congressite earlier and who had joined the opposition later, he stood up and said, "Mr. Prime Minister, I am going to put a point-blank question to you, and I expect a point-blank answer from you." Nehru said, "Acharya ji, what is your question?" Kripalani said, "Is non-violence the creed of the nation? Is it a pledge with us?" Nehru said, "Let me give a point-blank answer. Non-violence is something to which we are not pledged. Individuals can support non-violence, even groups, but no government can function that way. In case we make non-violence our creed, we shall not be able to maintain an army, an air force, a navy, or for that matter, even a police force. And no modern government can function that way." With all respect for Gandhiji, he said, "Let me tell you something. When the raiders had gone almost up to Srinagar, they were 40 miles away from Srinagar, the Maharaja acceded to the Indian Union. The only way in which Kashmir could have been saved was to airlift the soldiers so that they may reach Srinagar in time and push back the raiders." Nehru said, "I went to Gandhiji. I said, Bapu, tell us, how can we save Kashmir through non-violence now?" And Gandhiji's reply was, the apostle of non-violence, "Send the forces." So he had that realism to understand that in certain circumstances, things become difficult and you have to take recourse to violent means. In fact, one of the writers on Gandhiji, Raghavan Iyer, said that though Gandhiji was a very great person, he had not taken into account wholly the problems which an independent country has to face. His primary focus was agitation against a foreign government. I am not saying this to belittle Gandhiji. He was one of the greatest persons that the world knows of, but we make a mistake in understanding him. we attribute things to him which he did not mean. On a certain occasion, a reader of Harijan wrote a letter to Gandhiji and said, Mahatma ji, in the previous issue you said this, and in the present issue you are saying something which is not exactly the same. Which is the advice which I am supposed to follow? Gandhiji said, mine is a growing mind. I go on thinking about matters, I go on modifying my views. Whenever I make two statements, and if the second statement is different from the first statement, accept my second statement. So that is something which we all have to remember, when it comes to Gandhiji, or when it comes to Jawaharlal Nehru, or anybody else. Let us not take their naivete for granted. Let us not take their written word as gospel truth, because they had a growing mind and they were capable of changing their views. And finally, Mr. Chairman, when I was a student of the high school and when India became free, nothing was manufactured in India, barring one or two things. I used to go to the market along with my father, and all that I saw was made in UK, made in Japan, made in Germany. Nothing was produced in India, and there is nothing that is not produced in India. In spite of all our difficulties, we have made advances. In spite of the teething trouble, India has become a sound democracy, wedded to the ideal of secularism. Nehru saw to it that India becomes a great country, and as quickly as possible through economic advancement. And he used to say, the time has come when walking is not enough, we have to run, otherwise we become victims of economic imperialism. So we have the IIT and other organizations, we have the Sangeet Academy and other academies, and we have the scientific laboratories, everything which enables India to go through and become a great power. And while doing so, Nehru did not lose sight of the fact that ours is a great country with a great past, and the past has to be respected. Ladies and gentlemen, I have tried to be as brief as possible. Nehru, the subject is like an ocean, and it is possible for me to go on and on and on, but there is no point in doing so. I thank you all for giving me a very patient hearing.
Finally. राजूरकर सर आणि मित्रांनो, सर्वांना राम राम, नमस्कार, सलाम अलैकुम, जय भीम, सत श्री अकाल. तर मित्रांनो, याच्यामध्ये एवढ्या वेळामध्ये त्यांनी कसं बसवलं याचंच मला आश्चर्य वाटतं. कारण खूप गोष्टी आहेत, मिक्स इकॉनॉमी का स्वीकारली गेली, अमुक तमुक, आणि त्या प्रत्येकावर वेगवेगळं भाषण होईल. म्हणून असे जे काही प्रश्न राहिले असतील तर त्यांच्यासाठी परवा दिवशी आपण इथे 11 वाजता तुम्हाला बोललो आहे, आणि मराठी, इंग्रजी कुठल्याही भाषेत, हिंदी चालेल. ते उस्मानिया युनिव्हर्सिटीचे शिकले, त्यांचं मीडियम ऑफ इन्स्ट्रक्शन उर्दू आहे, त्यामुळं काही अडचण नाही भाषेची. जर समजा कोणाला वेळेची अडचण असेल तर तुमचे लेखी प्रश्न पाठवा, आणि त्याची उत्तरं आम्ही काय त्यांनी दिलेली आहेत हे थोडंसं इथं टिप्पण करून तुम्हाला ते परत देऊ. तर म्हणून ह्या तासामध्ये हे राहिलं ते राहिलं असं वाटेल, पण एक इंग्रजीत म्हणे, नॉट इनफ इज ऑलवेज गुड. नाही तर असं बाबा रे किती बोलतो, झालं की पुरेसं, दर महिन्याला आपली मन की बात किती बोलतोस रे बाबा, असं सारखं वाटतं. तर तसा प्रश्न नाही आहे. आता माझ्या मनात काय आले तेवढे विचार सांगतो. सरांच्यावर मी काय कॉमेंट करण्याइतका त्या विषयाचा अधिकारी नाही. एक तर नेहरू गांधी हे आमचं नातंच आहे, म्हणजे आमचं जीन आहे तो. हे गांधी भवन जिथं आपण बसलो आहे याचं उद्घाटन पंडित जवाहरलाल नेहरूंनीच केलेलं आहे. नाव गांधी भवन आहे आणि आमचं उद्देश आहे की गांधींची विचारसरणी बाय स्पिरिट जिवंत ठेवायची. त्यांचं शरीर जरी गेलं असेल म्हणून गांधींच्या हत्येनंतर हे उभं राहिलेले. या गांधी भवनाला गांधीजींचा स्पर्श नाही आहे, पण नेहरूंचा स्पर्श आहे, राजेंद्र बाबूंचा स्पर्श आहे, हे लक्षात घ्या. आणि गांधींच्या अस्थी इथं आहेत आमच्याजवळ. तर हे लक्षात घेतल्यानंतर मला सारखं मगा वाटत होतं की सर सांगत होते आणि आजची परिस्थिती, कारण मी सदर लिहितो त्यामुळे दर आठवड्याला सगळ्या परिस्थितीचं मनात एडिटिंग करावं लागतं, आकलन करावं लागतं. तर किती भिन्न आहे आणि किती चुकीचं सांगितलं असं एक एक प्रत्येकाला वाटत होतं. हे कसं आहे, समुद्राच्या कडेला किनाऱ्यावर खडक असतो आणि समुद्राला भरती येते आणि ओहोटी असते, याचा साक्षीदार खडक असतो. पण ज्यावेळेला भरती असते पाण्याला तेव्हा ते इतका आवाज करतो समुद्र आणि खडकाच्या अंगावरून जातो आणि सांगतो मला या समुद्राला खडकापासून मुक्त व्हायचं आहे, संपवणार तुला, सगळं संपवणार. आणि खडक हसत असतो की याला बेट्याला ओहोटी हे माहीतच नाही आहे, भरतीला माझ्या अंगावरून जातो आहे. आणि मग ओहोटी लागल्यावर समुद्राला किती ओहोटी आहे हे खडकापासून मोजतात. म्हणजे खडक आहे म्हणून ओहोटीची लांबी आहे. तसं आत्ताला काही ना उधाण आलेलं आहे. समुद्राची भरती आहे, गांधीजी वाईट, नेहरू वाईट, काहीच केलं नाही, काहीच केलं नाही त्यांनी देशाचं. सगळं काय जग माझ्यापासून सुरू झालं, मी आणि मागचा पास्ट असा जॉईंट आहे. आणि मधला 150 वर्षाचा स्वातंत्र्य लढा आणि त्याच्यानंतर पंडित जवाहरलाल नेहरू पहिले प्राईम मिनिस्टर, त्यांची काय कॉन्ट्रिब्युशन आहे फाउंडेशनमध्ये देशाच्या, हे काहीच नाही, माझ्यापासूनच आहे. आणि बरं हे सांगून आपल्या लोकांना पटते की नाही अशी शंका, कारण त्यांना बऱ्याच गोष्टी इतर माहिती आहेत म्हणून परदेशात जाऊन सांगायचं, काहीच माहीत नसतं त्या लोकांना. आता आयर्लंडमध्ये गेले. आयर्लंड म्हणजे आपल्या काश्मीरसारखा प्रश्न आहे. जगातलं पहिलं अतिरेकीन टेररिस्ट हे आयर्लंडमध्ये झाले आणि ब्रिटिशांपासून ते फुटले. त्यांचं भांडण आज चालूच होतं. म्हणून त्या ॲनी बेझंट ही आयरिश बाई काँग्रेसची अध्यक्ष होती त्या काळात, जेव्हा ती ब्रिटिशच मानले जायचे नागरिक. आता आयर्लंडला कोण जाणारच नाही, कुठलाही शहाणा प्राईम मिनिस्टर जाणार नाही. तुम्ही आम्ही जाऊ शकतो आयरिश कंट्री बघायला चांगली म्हणून, पण टुरिस्ट म्हणून, पण प्राईम मिनिस्टर जाणार नाही. कारण ते जाणं म्हणजे इकडं काश्मीरला न कळत फुटायला नैतिक पाठिंबा देणं आहे. मग असं असताना गेले आत्ताचे प्राईम मिनिस्टर. आणि पहिलं काय त्याने डुगडुगी वाजवली की मी पहिला आयर्लंडला आलो. एकही प्राईम मिनिस्टर आयर्लंडला आला नाही. म्हणजे पंडित जवाहरलाल नेहरू बाकीचे सगळे मध्ये झालेले सगळे, म्हणजे काय त्यांना कळलंच नाही आयर्लंड कुठे आहे काय. मी कसा सगळीकडे जाऊन आलो आणि आयर्लंडला आलो. दुसरी गोष्ट, त्यांच्या सभेच्या आधी तिथं संस्कृत प्रार्थना झाली. तर महाशय म्हणाले आयर्लंडमध्ये संस्कृत प्रार्थना माझ्या भाषणाच्या आधी. मी तर आश्चर्यचकित झालो. हे मला माझ्या देशात नाही करता येत, कारण माझ्याकडे सेक्युलर लोक अंगावर येतील की प्राईम मिनिस्टरच्या आधी संस्कृत प्रार्थना कुठली. हे काय करताय, चाचपून बघतायत लोक किती मूर्ख आहेत आणि लोक किती गांधी नेहरूंना विसरलेत. आता त्या आयर्लंडमध्ये संस्कृत प्रार्थना म्हणतात असं दुर्बिणीतून पाहिलं, अगदी बारीक बारीक शोध घेतला तरी शक्य नाही सापडणं. हे बरोबरच घेऊन गेले संस्कृत प्रार्थना म्हणणं. आणि ते प्रार्थना म्हणाले. आता त्यांना म्हटलं आता यजमान आलेत तर काय त्यांचं जसं असेल तेवढं करावं ना, 5-10 मिनटाचा तर प्रश्न आहे. का ठो त्यांना कळलं नाही. कान बंद काय केले आणि उघडे ठेवले काय, ते प्रार्थनेच्या वेळेला काहीच नाही. पण हे आयर्लंडमध्ये जाऊन सेक्युलर लोकांना सांगतायत. याचा अर्थ त्यांच्या मनामध्ये अडथळा कशाला येईल असताना वाटते. उद्या शाळा कॉलेज सर्व हिंदुस्थानातल्या सर्व शिक्षण संस्था आणि जे काही सरकारी असेल त्यांच्या हातात ते त्या सर्व ठिकाणी रोज पहिल्यांदा नमस्ते सदा वत्सले मातृभूमी ही प्रार्थना करायची. त्याला किती लोक ओरडतात याचा अंदाज घेता येते. तर म्हणजे जसं असतं ना, आंब्याचा रस काढण्यापूर्वी आधी बिलबिला किती झाल्या बघतात ना, म्हणतात आणखीन बिलबिला कर, झाला नाही. हिप्नॉटिझमचं एक शास्त्र आहे की तुम्ही जर मनात म्हणला की माझ्यावर काहीच परिणाम नाही होणार तुझ्या हिप्नॉटिझमचा, तो होतच नाही. असं जगात हिप्नॉटिझमचं कुठलंही शास्त्र नाही की तुमची इच्छा नसताना तुम्हाला हिप्नोटाईज करता येतं. म्हणून आम जनतेची इच्छा आहे का हिप्नॉटिझम करून घ्यायची, याची पाहणी चालू आहे सध्या. आणि ते सनातन प्रभाचं जे आहे ना, ते काय केलं त्यांना ते तज्ज्ञ आहेत हिप्नॉटिझममधले, म्हणून त्यांनी पहिल्यांदा तुला अध्यात्मात पोचवतो, मोक्षाला तुला पोचवतो असं म्हणलं. आपल्याकडे ते असतंच ना, मेल्यावर काय होईल, मोक्ष झाला तर बरं, नाही तर नरकात गेलो तर, बहुतेकांना नरकाचीच भीती असते. तर ते एकदा आले की मग पुढं आहे विष्णूचा अवतार, यांचा केस गळला की सोन्याची तार होते, असं टी व्हीवर दाखवलं. यांच्या अंगावर, लोकांच्या अंगावर म्हातारपणी फोड येतात, काही स्किनचे डाग येतात, यांच्या अंगावर सारखे ओम फुटत आहेत म्हणे, कोणाच्या, आठवल्यांच्या. आणि मग त्याचा परिणाम झाल्यावर यांचा सेकंड पार्ट ऑफ हिप्नॉटिझम चालू होतो. हा जनरल एनी अफवा हे हिप्नॉटिझम असतो. आता महाराष्ट्रात एकदा गणपती दूध प्याला होता. आता गणपती दूध प्याला आज कुणी दाखवून द्यावं, पण त्यावेळेला महाराष्ट्रामध्ये BJP आणि शिवसेनेचं सरकार होतं, मनोहर जोशी होते. त्यांना पत्रकारांनी विचारलं तुमचा प्याला, वा मी तर महाराष्ट्राचा CM, पाईपच लावला होता म्हणे, सारखं दुधाचे टँकर ओतावं लागायचे. हे काय, उद्या तुम्ही हिप्नॉटिझमला शरण जाल का, तुमची बुद्धी विवेकहीनता कुठं होते, तर धर्माचं नाव काढल्यावर विवेकहीनता होते. याचा सर्वे चाललेला असतो. 1 वर्ष पाहत होते गणपती दूध प्याला, जाता येतं विचारलं, आपल्या वाट्याचं सहज विचारलं, रुपालीला चहा पिता पिता, का हो तुमचं प्याला का, आता लोक म्हणे जाऊ दे कटकटीचा, प्याला केलं की नाव पत्ता, तुमचा मोबाईल द्या, ईमेल ID द्या, म्हणजे दंगा करायच्या वेळेला तुम्हाला खोट्या गोष्टी सांगतो. असे मालेगावचे दंगे झाले, दंग्याचे आम्ही अभ्यास केला. तर मला नाही वाटत यांना राष्ट्र बांधायचं आहे. ह्या गांधी नेहरू राष्ट्रवादाचे 3 भक्कम आधार होते, म्हणून आपण जगामध्ये टिकलो आत्तापर्यंत. इतर देश गेले, एक हिंदू मुस्लिम ऐक्य, एक दुसरं जाती निर्मूलन, म्हणजे अस्पृश्य, म्हणजे जात काढल्याशिवाय अस्पृश्य जात जाऊच शकत नाही. तुमच्या मनात जात आहे मी अस्पृश्यता मानत नाही, या म्हणण्याला अर्थच नाही. जातीचा लॉजिकल पार्ट अस्पृश्यता म्हणजे जाती निर्मूलन. आणि तिसरा भाग 100% एम्प्लॉयमेंट, चरखा कशाचं प्रतीक आहे. नोकरी नाही दिली तर रोजगार द्या, पण 100% भारतीयांची काळजी घ्या, त्याच्या पोटात काही जातं आहे का नाही. ह्या राष्ट्रवादाचे 3 भक्कम पायावर आपला स्वातंत्र्य लढा झाला, नंतरचा काळ गेला. त्यामुळे हे छोट्या डोक्याच्या माणसाचा, संकुचित विचार लोकांचा सत्तेपर्यंत खेळ झाला नव्हता. काँग्रेसमध्ये लहान माणसं आली आणि लहान माणसांचा काळ सुरू झाला. काँग्रेसमध्ये उगाचच आपल्याला वाटायचं हे मोठे तो मोठे, पण आम्हाला आमचे मित्र सांगायचे ना, तुम्ही मागे पडला म्हणाले, तुम्ही मिनिस्टर वगैरे नाही झाला. मी आमदार असताना आमचे जे मित्र मुख्यमंत्री झाले ते मला सांगताय, तुझी काळजी वाटते रे, कॉलेजचे मित्र आपण, तू सुद्धा एखाद्याला मुख्यमंत्री व्हायला पाहिजे. म्हणलं काय आपल्या विचाराने झालं तर काय हरकत नाही, पण नाही होणार, तुम्हाला भिकेचे डोळायला लागले म्हणे, प्रामाणिक राहायचं म्हणे, घर मोठं करायचंच नाही. अरे असं कुठं असतं काय, आपल्या लोकांना पॉवरफुल घर, महालात राहिले हे आवडतं. तर म्हणलं असं मला काय वाटत नाही बुवा, आम्ही गांधीवादी असल्या कारणानं आम्ही ते गांधीची 11 व्रतं आहेत. हे 11 व्रतं म्हणजे काय, बुद्धी शुद्ध ठेवण्यासाठीचे नियम आहेत. सत्य बोलायचं, अहिंसा, अपरिग्रह, जेवढं पाहिजे तेवढंच घ्यायचं आयुष्यात, जास्त घेतलं तर ओरबाडलं जाईल, बुद्धी शुद्ध राहणार नाही, सर्वत्र भयवर्जनम, म्हणजे तुला तर मी घाबरणारच नाही, निर्भयता हे व्रताचा भाग आहे, पण माझी तुला भीती वाटत असेल तरी मी अस्वस्थ आहे, म्हणून त्याच्याही मनात आपल्याविषयी भय नको, सर्वत्र भयवर्जनम. तर असं सगळं आहे. आणि आता नेहरूंचं सगळं ते मोठेपण मधले त्यांनी ज्या काय आठवणी सांगितल्या, हे सगळं पाहिल्यावर खडक आणि समुद्राचीच उपमा मला येते. यांना माहीत नाही की आता खडकावरून आम्ही जातो आहे म्हणून सगळ्यांना संपवलं आहे आणि उद्या त्यांना ओहोटी लागणार आहे, तेव्हा इथूनच किती दूर गेले गांधी नेहरूपासून असंच मोजलं जाणार आहे फुटपट्टी लावून. अहो केंद्रीय मंत्री काय बोलतात. आता यांनी सांगितलं की नेहरूंच्या मंत्रिमंडळात विद्वान लोक काँग्रेसचे नसलेले B.R. आंबेडकर, गांधीजींना शिवाय गांधींनीच आग्रह केला त्यांना घ्यायला आणि राज्यघटना लिहिली. जॉन मथाई, C.D. देशमुख सगळे लोक सांगितले. आणि यांच्या मंत्रिमंडळात काय साधू बैरागी कशाचं काही भानच नाही, समजतच नाही. साधू बैरागी वगैरे असे लोकांचं मंत्रिमंडळ आपल्या देशात. आता हे जर थोडंफार कमी वाटलं तर अजून 2-4 कुंभमेळ्यामध्ये गाजलेले घेतील तिथे. कुंभमेळ्याला वाटेल तेवढा पैसा, प्रायोरिटी इकॉनॉमिक कुंभमेळ्याची. आता कुंभमेळ्यामध्ये ते कुंड एवढं बरं का सर इतकं लहान आहे की आंघोळ केल्यानंतर पाणी घट्ट घट्ट होत जातं. म्हणजे जसं मातीत पाणी टाकलं चिखल होत जातो तसं इतकं ते घाण आणि त्याला पवित्र म्हणायचं. पण याला प्रायोरिटी ह्या सरकारी. परवा एक मुस्लिम मारला, मंदिरावरनं लाऊडस्पीकर लावून पुजाराला पिस्तूल लावून अनाऊन्स करायला सांगितलं की अखलाक नावाच्या माणसाकडे, छोटे गाव, सगळे ओळखतात त्याला, गरीब माणूस, मुलगा मिलिटरीत, आणि याच्याकडे गाईचं मांस आहे आणि याच्याच गावात इतर हिंदूसुद्धा मांस खाणार आहे बरं का, पण तो मुस्लिम आहे. आणि हे शिकवलेलं त्या बजरंग दलात आणि त्या ह्याच्यात हिंदू एकता काय काय, आयुष्यात एक तरी मुसलमान मारला पाहिजे. ही संधी आली, सगळे चला रे चला, चला बरं. गेला तुम्ही त्या घरात गोमांस आहे तर उचलून काढावं ना, पाहावं ना. तसं नाही केलं, त्याला बाहेर आत गोमांस नव्हतंच, बाहेर त्याला मारून टाकला, बदडून मारला, गोळी घालून. असं एकदमही प्राण नाही घेतला, बदडून मारला. हे काय आहे म्हणजे कुठून आपण कुठपर्यंत आलो. म्हणून आम्ही असं ठरवलं की गांधी नेहरू हे काय होते एवढं तरी लोकांना सांगत राहायचं. आणि आज नेहरूंवरही हल्ला चाललेला आहे, गांधीवर त्यांना वाटतं आता जमलं काम. एकदा जे काय उरलं काही लोक थोडंसं आमच्याबद्दल तर गांधींना आम्ही मानतो की नाही झाडू दिला हातात. पुढचे संबंध भारतामध्ये गांधींचे पुतळे काठी घेतलेले नसणार, झाडू घेतलेले. मग झालं, गांधींचं देणं देऊन टाकलं. आता नेहरू चेचायचे, नेहरूंच्या सगळ्या चुका, जे काही आज वाईट असेल ते नेहरूंमुळे झालं. आणि अशा वेळेला हा आजार कमी कसा करायचा. हा आजार फार विचित्र आहे, संकुचितपणाचा आजार आहे. म्हणजे मनच लहान आहे, मन मोठं कसं करणार, ते यांचं तर काही करता येणार नाही. मन निदान गांधी नेहरूचा बचाव करणं हे आमचं महाराष्ट्र गांधी स्मारक निधीचं एक जबाबदारी, आमच्या ध्येयाचा भाग आहे. कीप देम अलाइव्ह बाय स्पिरिट. आणि मग आज नेहरूंच्या बाबतीमध्ये बोलायचं जर झालं तर हे नंबर 1 आहे देशात. इंटरनॅशनलसुद्धा नेहरू ऐकायचे आहेत का, नेहरू समजून घ्यायचे आहेत का, तर राजूरकरांना बोलवा. आणि तसे तर ते माझे नातेवाईकच आहेत तिथं, आमचे इथं बसलेले सगळे बरं का. तर म्हणून मग त्यांना बोलवलं. त्यांचं वय पाहता त्यांनी आज इतकं सुंदर भाषण इथे दिलं आणि खरोखरच ते एक्सपर्ट आहे. म्हणजे त्यांना चॅलेंज करायचं असेल तर कोणी करावं, त्याच्याबद्दल काय व्हायचं नाही, त्याला सांगताच येणार नाही, यांचं खोडून काढता येणार नाही. तर आज राजूरकरांनी आपणास आणि आपणही मोठ्या संख्येनं आला. म्हणजे आम्ही असं म्हणतो की खुर्च्या पुरेशा ठेवाव्यात, पण आपण अंदाज करून ठेवलेल्या खुर्च्या कमी पडाव्यात, म्हणजे कार्यक्रम सक्सेस झाला. तर काही लोक जरा बैसाची त्यांची झाली, त्यांची आपण दिलगिरी प्रदर्शित करूया आणि ते आपल्याला माफ करतीलच, कारण उशिरा येणाऱ्यांना मिळेल तीच जागा मिळणार. म्हणजे तर आज आपण पूर्ण संख्येने इथं आला, याबद्दल मी तुमचेही आभार मानतो, सरांचे मनपूर्वक आभार मानतो, हार्दिक आभार मानतो. त्यांनी आपल्याला भरभरून दिलं. याची आम्ही CD केलेली. ही CDसुद्धा आम्ही विक्रीची व्यवस्था ठेवणार आहोत. आणि परवा दिवशीच्या याला तुम्ही या आणि त्या प्रश्नोत्तराचं सुद्धा चित्रण करू, काय काय लोकांच्या डोक्यात आहे. कारण अशी उत्तरं देणारी माणसं पुढच्या याच्यात असतीलच असं नाही. कशी येणार, या वातावरणामध्ये तयार कशी होणार. अनेक लोकांनी आता नेहरूवर PhD करायचं ठरवलं असेल आणि वय सरांचं जेव्हा होतं 30 तसं घेतलं असेल तर त्याला त्याचं गाईड सांगणार ना, अरे वेडा काय यांच्यावर घेतोस तू, आता या अटल बिहारींवर यांच्यावरच PhD करायला पाहिजे, गोळवलकर गुरुजींवर, मुसोलिनीवर. आता मुसोलिनीचा मला किस्सा सांगितला. मुसोलिनी म्हणतो की नेहरू आले पाहिजेत आणि नेहरू म्हणतात तू फॅसिस्ट आहेत, मी तुझ्या दारात पाऊल ठेवणार नाही. याच्या उलट मुंजे नागपूरचे हिंदुत्ववाद्यांचे आद्य शंकराचार्य म्हणा, ते त्याला भेटायला गेले इथून. काय फॅसिझम काय आणला. फॅसिझम म्हणजे काय होतं त्यावेळेला तो शिवी नव्हती, त्यांनी नावच घेतलं होतं पार्टीचं, फॅसिस्ट पार्टी. की समाज दुबळा का होतो तर विचारवंत लोकांना विवेकी बनवतात आणि विवेक आला की त्याला आक्रमक येत नाही. मारावं तर बरं नाही, माणुसकी आली तर दुसऱ्याचं खून करावं असं वाटत नाही, म्हणून त्यांचं विवेकशून्य करायचं. त्याचे अडथळे विचारवंत आहे म्हणून घरात जाऊन त्यांना ठोकायचं, जमलं तर मारायचं ठार. तेच एक्झॅक्टली आता दाभोळकर, कलबुर्गी, कॉम्रेड पानसरे यांच्याबाबत चालले. हे लोक विवेकी बनवतात त्यामुळं आमची घोडदौड थांबते. तर हा फॅसिस्ट विचार म्हणजे तिथे गेले, त्याच्या पाठीवर थाप मारले. बेटा काय सुंदर चालू आहे सिटालीत, परदेशी दौऱ्याची हौस असते. आणि मग हळूच म्हणाले पण आम्ही हे तर 5000 वर्षापासून, आम्ही म्हणजे श्रेष्ठ वर्णाने 5000 वर्षापासूनच हे केलं आहे, तर कधी अडचण आली तर विचारता आम्हाला. पण आत्ता करतोयच ना हे, दुबळ्यांना मारून टाकायचं आणि दुबळे करतायत विचारवंत म्हणून मूळ नदीचा उगमच नष्ट करून टाकाय. गंगोत्री नष्ट केली म्हणजे पुढे गंगा मैली होतच नाही ना. हे सगळे गंगा मैली करण्याचा कार्यक्रम आहे म्हणून तो मारत होता. आणि हे जाऊन त्याच्या पाठीवर थाप मारता. हे तर आम्ही ब्राह्मणांनी फार पूर्वीच लोकांना दाबून ठेवलं आहे. तेव्हा तुम्ही या, कधी लागलं तुम्हाला तर तुमचं डिफिकल्टी सोडू. तर ही सगळी पार्श्वभूमी आजची आहे आणि याच्यात हे भाषण आहे. हे साधं नाही आहे. इथं तरुण पिढी बरीच आलेली आहे. हे स्पर्धा परीक्षेला बसणार आहे. पुण्यातच एक दुसरं स्कूल ऑफ थॉट आहे. म्हणजे स्पर्धा परीक्षेला मार्क मिळवायचे इतर विषयाची वेगळे, पण फाउंडेशन कोर्स, तर फाउंडेशनमध्ये दुसरं फाउंडेशन देणार आहे असे लोक आहेत. तर हे गांधी नेहरू समजून घेतल्याशिवाय कोणाही भारतीय नागरिकाला भारतही करणार नाही आणि स्वतः कोण तेही करणार नाही. काहीतरी मग बारीक, मी या जातीचा, मी या धर्माचा. इथं 12 धर्म आहे तर मी 12 धर्माचा हे म्हणण्याची कुवत गांधीजी आणि नेहरू देतात. आणि म्हणून सरांचं भाषण आणि इतकं बारकावे त्यांनी सांगितले याबद्दल त्यांचे मी मनपूर्वक आभार मानतो. आपल्या आभार मानतो आणि या ठिकाणी थांबतो. पुढच्या काही सूचना असल्या तर द्या. सूचना उद्याच्या परवाच्या कार्यक्रमात.
इथे आभार पण मानतायत आणि पुढच्या कार्यक्रमाच्या सूचनाही देत आहेत. संदीप बर्वे आमचे शांती दलाचे कार्यवाह आणि युक्रांचे कार्यवाह आहेत.
नाही तुम्हाला बरोबर चांगला.
मी ज्या पिढीचं प्रतिनिधित्व करतो या पिढीच्या दृष्टीने आजचं हे भाषण डॉक्टर राजूरकरांचं अतिशय महत्त्वाचं याच्यासाठी आहे. आत्ताचा काळ आणि जे काय चाललं आहे ते डॉक्टर कुमार सप्तर्शींनी सांगितलेलंच आहे. पण डॉक्टर राजूरकरांच्या भाषणाचं वैशिष्ट्य आपण सर्वांनी ऐकलेलं आहे. अतिशय शांतपणे, अतिशय संयतपणे आणि खूप बहुआयामी नेहरूंच्या व्यक्तिमत्वाचा आढावा त्यांनी घेतलेला आहे. स्वातंत्र्या अगोदरचं भारताच्या स्वातंत्र्य लढ्याचं आंतरराष्ट्रीय राजकारणामध्ये असलेलं महत्त्व त्यांनी अधोरेखित केलं आणि स्वातंत्र्यानंतर लोकशाही आणि धर्मनिरपेक्षता आपल्या सगळ्यांमध्ये जी रुजवली त्या पंडित जवाहरलाल नेहरूंचा या देशाच्या राजकारणावर, समाजकारणावर किती मोठा प्रभाव आहे आणि त्याच्यामागे त्यांची जी जडणघडण झाली स्वातंत्र्य लढ्यामध्ये ती त्यांनी अधोरेखित केली. डॉक्टर राजूरकरांच्या या व्याख्यानामधून त्यांचा जो शांतपणा आणि सम्यकपणा जो आपल्याला इथे अभिप्रेत होता की कुठलीही भूमिका मांडत असताना सर्वांगीण विचार करून नेहरू मांडणं हे आवश्यक आहे, तो त्यांनी मांडला. आणि धर्मनिरपेक्षतेबद्दल त्यांनी जे सांगितलं ते त्यांच्या एकूण कामामध्येही आपल्याला दिसतं की डॉक्टर राजूरकर नावाचा महाराष्ट्रात जन्माला आलेला माणूस उर्दू मीडियममध्ये शिकतो, हैदराबादमध्ये राहतो आणि उत्तम इंग्रजीतनं भाषण करतो. याच्यापेक्षा धर्मनिरपेक्षतेचा किती मोठा पुरावा आपल्याला द्यायला पाहिजे. तर ही खूप मोठी देण आहे. या अतिशय उत्तम भाषणाबद्दल मी महाराष्ट्र गांधी स्मारक निधीचे अध्यक्ष डॉक्टर कुमार सप्तर्शी आणि सचिव अनवराजन आणि आपल्या सगळ्यांच्या वतीने डॉक्टर राजूरकरांचं खूप आभार मानतो. आणि मी अशी अपेक्षा व्यक्त करतो, जसं परवा सकाळी 11 वाजता ते आपल्याला भेटणार आहेत, तसे वारंवार त्यांनी गांधी भवनमध्ये यावं. त्यांचं वय आणि प्रकृती बघता त्यांना आम्ही त्रास देणं योग्य नाही, पण विनंती करेन मी त्यांना की त्यांच्या विचारांची आत्ता आपल्याला खूप गरज आहे. कारण ते प्रत्यक्ष पंडित नेहरूंना भेटलेले आहेत, म्हणून जे खोटं नाटं आपल्याला सांगितलं जातं ते प्रत्यक्ष त्यांना भेटलेल्या माणसाकडनं ऐकणं खूप महत्त्वाचं आहे. आणि डॉक्टर कुमार सप्तर्शींनी उल्लेख केलेलाच आहे की या राष्ट्रपिता महात्मा गांधी सप्ताहामध्ये वैचारिक कार्यक्रम ठेवण्याचा उद्देश हाच आहे की जे खरं आहे, जे सम्यक आहे ते आपल्याला या माध्यमातून कळावं. आणि हे समजून घ्यायला इतक्या मोठ्या संख्येने आज इथे सर्व कार्यकर्ते, विद्यार्थी, विविध मान्यवर क्षेत्रातले, सामाजिक, राजकीय, शैक्षणिक क्षेत्रातली जी लोकं आलेली आहेत, तुम्हा सर्व पुणेकर नागरिक, गांधीप्रेमी नागरिकांचं मी महाराष्ट्र गांधी स्मारक निधीच्या वतीने अतिशय हार्दिक स्वागत करतो. आणि अध्यक्षांच्या परवानगीने हा कार्यक्रम संपवण्यापूर्वी उद्या आणि परवाच्या कार्यक्रमांची आपल्याला माहिती देतो. उद्या दुपारी 3 वाजता आपल्या मिनी थिएटरमध्ये मिस्टर अँड मिसेस अय्यर हा अपर्णा सेन यांनी दिग्दर्शित केलेला चित्रपट आपण दाखवणार आहोत. संध्याकाळी 6 वाजता पंडित शौनक अभिषेकी यांचं गायन ऐकायला आपल्याला मिळणार आहे. या दोन्ही कार्यक्रमांना आपण आवर्जून उपस्थित राहावं. आणि या गांधी सप्ताहाच्या समारोपाच्या दिवशी संध्याकाळी 4 वाजता, जसं आज आपण दुपारी 4 वाजता हिटलरवर चार्ली चॅप्लिननी केलेला चित्रपट बघितला, द ग्रेट डिक्टेटर, तसा स्टीवन स्पिलबर्ग दिग्दर्शित शिंडलर्स लिस्ट हा हिटलरच्या काळातल्या जूनचा जो छळ झाला त्याच्यावरचा चित्रपट आपण बघू शकता. सायंकाळी 5 वाजता 7 ऑक्टोबरला टोपी हा ॲनिमेशन चित्रपट बघू शकता. आणि संध्याकाळी 6 वाजता या गांधी सप्ताहाचा समारोपाचा कार्यक्रम होणार आहे. समोरच्या कॅम्पसमध्ये, म्हणजे रस्ता ओलांडून जो समोरचा गांधी भवनचा कॅम्पस आहे, या कॅम्पसमध्ये खादी, हातमाग आणि इतर गृहोपयोगी वस्तूंचं प्रदर्शन आणि विक्री आहे. या सर्व कार्यक्रमांना आपण आपल्या वेळात वेळ काढून उपस्थित राहावं. ज्यांना ज्यांना डॉक्टर राजूरकरांशी चर्चा करायची आहे त्यांनी परवा सकाळी 11 वाजता आवर्जून गांधी भवनमध्ये यावं. आपण सर्वजण इथे आलात, सर्वांचं मनपूर्वक आभार मानतो आणि हा कार्यक्रम अध्यक्षांच्या परवानगीने संपला असं जाहीर करतो. धन्यवाद.